as we all are going through this crisis of COVID-19, and since we at CDFT got involved both in diagnostics as well as the viral sequencing. So we thought this time we'll have a little different kind of presentation other than the usual cases that we have. So today I plan to discuss mainly about uh, initially in brief about the real-time PCR per se, because most of us medical geneticists usually don't go into the real-time PCR because that is mostly used in the infectious disease diagnostics. So I thought this will be a good opportunity to just go through the different aspects of real-time PCR, how it gets used in different way, with some of the applications even in the medical, the molecular diagnostics field in genetic medicine also. And then I'll just take you through the setup of diagnostics for COVID-19 in our lab, how we do it, and about our experience on sequencing some of these viral genomes in the last few days. So to begin with, as we all know, being students of human genetics, that if we have the spectrum of human disorders, then in the spectrum of human disorders on causative spectrum, we have the totally genetic and the totally environmental factors. So we have certain genes, certain diseases which are totally genetic, like chromosomal or the various single gene disorders. And you have certain diseases like motor vehicle accident or nutritional deficiencies, which are purely environmental. And then we have this multifactorial disorders in between with genetic and environmental component. Now, till quite a few years earlier, we usually used to think that infectious diseases are a totally environmental condition. But with more and more knowledge coming up, we now know that there is a lot of genetic component to the infectious diseases. And this we know by the knowledge that all people who are infected by the same organism do not behave in the same way. So the response to the organism is different in different individuals, and that's why we feel that there are going to be some genetic factors involved in causation of infectious also. So that is why a lot of host genetic factor studies also are being done, especially even in COVID-19, that we all have heard that about more than 85% of people do not have any symptoms. So there could be some reasons for that, and people are trying to find out host genetic factors involved in severe or mild infections that people get. So just for a little brush up for the students. So basically DNA based testing, if we think about, then almost all the genetic testing in DNA based or molecular testing is basically based on these two principles, that is complementary hybridization and polymerase chain reactions. So if we understand these two basic principles, then right from a simple PCR to microarray to next generation sequencing, everything is based on these two principles. So complementary hybridization tells us that G pairs with C and A with T, and the polymerase chain reaction principle helps us to amplify the DNA to make it visible in different forms. So based on these two principles, most of our genetic diagnostic tests are based on. And if we look at the molecular diagnostics applications, then in the field of genetic diseases, we have applications for diagnosis of disease where it can help in finding the cause, in prognosis of disease to find the severity or avoid the complications, for prenatal diagnosis, for termination of pregnancy, in genetic counseling for reproductive planning for the family or family screening, and pre-symptomatic testing for the late onset neurological disorders. So we almost all of us are involved in this kind of application of molecular diagnostics. But another application which many of us are not really involved, maybe few of us are doing, and that is mainly in oncology. So oncology also has a lot of application of molecular diagnostics, where beginning with diagnosis like confirmation of the pathological diagnosis, especially in the blood leukemias. Then you have prognosis, a very important role of molecular diagnostics in response to therapy. lot of pharmacogenetic work being done on drug selection for particular type of cancers or follow-up, then genetic counseling for familial cancers, and then pre-symptomatic testing for preventing cancers like in BRCA1 testing. So all these molecular diagnostics applications are there in huge amount in oncology. And the third major area of applications for molecular diagnostics is in the field of infectious diseases. So here molecular diagnostic approaches help us to do rapid and accurate diagnosis. So mainly for identification of that particular organism. So this is much faster than the microbiological techniques. Then for quantification, so this is especially important in viral load analysis for either hepatitis B, HIV, or any other virus. Then antibiotic susceptibility. So resistance detection can be done using molecular diagnostics, especially in tuberculosis. And then now in case of outbreaks investigation and epidemiological studies, again molecular diagnostics plays a very important role. So today, for a change, we are going to discuss about the application of molecular diagnostics in the infectious diseases area. And here real-time PCR plays a major role in diagnostics for these conditions. So let us go in little detail about real-time PCR and its different applications, both in infectious diseases as well as in the medical genetics also. So how does the real-time PCR differ from the normal PCR that we know? So the normal PCR or the PCR mostly used by us in the labs is the endpoint PCR, because here we are looking at the result of the PCR at the end by running a gel and looking at the bands in the agarose gel. So this is a semi-quantitative. We can always quantify these bands which are present in the agarose gel, but it is less accurate. You can use densitometry or something to quantify it, but the quantification is always going to be inaccurate in a endpoint PCR. As opposed to this, the real-time PCR gives us accurate quantification. So it's a more sensitive method where you are looking at the product formation right from the uh, cycles very earlier on. So here you can see at 18 on 20 cycles only you start seeing the product, whereas here you are looking at the product at the end of 30 cycles. So that's the major difference between an endpoint PCR and a real-time PCR. So if you have to classify real-time PCR, then based on the nucleic acids, then for the DNA, you could either use a probe-based real-time PCR or a dye-based real-time PCR. So we'll come into details of all this, but everywhere you can classify the real-time PCR technology application into probe-based or DNA-based. This is for the or dye-based, that is for the DNA, and then for the RNA. So for the RNA, you have a semi-quantitative and a really quantitative real-time PCR, or you can see a single step and a double step. So in the single step, what we are directly the RNA from the RNA, we are doing the quantification, which again can be dye-based or probe-based, or you can do in a two-step method. So you first convert the RNA into cDNA and then use this cDNA in the same way that you use the DNA. You use the cDNA to again quantify using either probe-based or dye-based method. So this is the overall general classification of different types of real-time PCRs that we can use. So let's come to the actual technologies used here. So the broadly the technologies are DNA binding dyes are used in one of the technologies. So these are also called as intercalating dyes, or the other is sequence specific probes, also called as hydrolysis probe based methods. So you can either have the intercalating dye based method where a fluorescent dye, mostly cyber green is the dye used, and the second method is the hydrolysis probe based method or the sequence specific probe based method. Here mostly used are either the linear probes, which we commonly know as the Tachman probes, and the molecular beacons. So this is the broad classification of how the different probes or dyes are used in real time PCR. So if you have to first see the dye-based method, so this is the DNA binding dye-based method. So here what happens is that this is the cyber green dye. So when this dye is not attached to the double-stranded DNA, then the fluorescence is less. But Once this dye attaches to the or intercalates between the double stranded DNA, the fluorescence increases 100 to 1000 fold. So you can see this detection, so it helps in detection of double stranded DNA. The dye will not bind to single stranded DNA, or uh, so but since the dye will bind to any double stranded DNA, there is lot of non-specificity in this kind of method. So let's see how we use this kind of dye binding method for doing the real-time PCR. So in real-time PCR, instead of the gel, we are going to get this kind of a graph where on the y-axis you have the relative fluorescence units, and on the x-axis you have the number of PCR cycles. So in the initial few cycles, the fluorescence is not going to be detectable, and then slowly after a few cycles, the fluorescence is slowly going to increase, and once it reaches at the detectable threshold, this cycle is called as the cycle threshold or the CT value. So CT value is the cycle at which the fluorescence is detectable by our methods. So this tells us that this PCR is now entering into the exponential phase, and this is where we do all our quantitative calculations. So CT value is the most important value that we need to check in a real-time PCR. So this threshold can be changed. If we want, we can change the threshold, but usually the instruments will keep a automatic threshold, and then we just need to see the cycle at which the detectable fluorescence is visible. So here you can see this cycle number is the CT value for this particular sample. Okay. So let's see here. So in if you are using cyber green, this is the most commonly used dye binding method. So as we said earlier, when the DNA is single stranded, it's not going to bind. When it is double stranded, it binds to the DNA, and it is going to give us a signal which we will see in the form of a graph. Now, how do we use the dye binding method here? So we take the template. So this we need a standard curve generation here. So what we do is that we take the template here and do a serial dilution. So you take the template, you make 1:10 dilution, then 1:10 of that, 1:10 of that. So ultimately you are getting 1:10, 1:100, 1:1000, 1:10,000 kind of dilutions. Now with these dilutions, you are going to run the initial PCR. Okay. So initial PCR, when you run, you can see here, if there are 10 to the power 0 number of molecules. So if there are 10 to the power 0 number of molecules, that means one molecule, then
and it's quite
you
nice.
are getting.
It's mirchi achar. It's very tasty.
Hello. Yeah. So if you look at the graph here, this is the graph for single molecule here. So you can see, and then this is the graph for 10 to the power 1 molecules. So that is 10 molecules. This is for 100, 1000, 10,000, and so on. So you can see here, no, the sorry. So this is the graph for the dilution. So if you can see here, the uh, maximum number of molecules when they are present, so it is going to be detected at much early stage. Okay. So if there are 1 lakh molecules, then at 10th cycle itself, the CT value is 10 here, because at 10th cycle itself you are detecting the fluorescence. But if there are 10,000 molecules, then you will detect it at 12th cycle. Similarly, if there are 100 molecules, you will detect it at 20th cycle. If there is 10 molecule, you will detect it at 24 cycle, and if it is one molecule, you will detect it at 26 cycle. So depending on the amount, you are going to get this, and based on this, then you are going to draw a standard curve. And once this standard curve is drawn, now you take your own sample, and you do, and you once you plot the CT value on the standard curve, then you can get the log copy number. So let us see an example here. So this is a case that what we have done. So you can see there are serial dilutions of DNA right from 100 nanogram to 0.01 nanogram. So you can see this is the this is the value for the 100 nanogram DNA. This is the value for 1 nanogram of DNA, and this is the value for 0.01 nanogram of DNA. This is obtained through serial dilutions. So we have this graph available with us with the CT values on the y-axis. Okay. So once this graph has been made, now we run our particular sample, and once we run our sample, we find that the CT value is somewhere here. So maybe 25, 24 cycles, 23 cycles. So from this CT value, we can extrapolate and say that the amount is 20 nanogram. So in this way, we can quantify the amount of DNA present in our sample by plotting it onto the standard curve. So in this way, we can use the dye dilution method to quantify the amount of DNA in our particular sample. I'll just show you one example of this. So this has very important application in validation of array CGH results. Many of us order for array CGH, and when we get either a deletion or duplication, we would like to validate the array CGH results. So this can either be validated by FISH or by quantitative PCR, which is also as a real-time PCR. So how do we use the real-time PCR for validation of array CGH results? So let's see this one sample, one case where the SNP array detected a 5 MB microdeletion in a patient. Patient had developmental delay, microcephaly, and seizures. You can see that there is a into 1, that means there is a deletion of these nucleotides at 14q12, and if you visualize it in the decipher, you can see this is the part of deletion. So within this part there are multiple genes here. So for qPCR we have selected the FOXG1 gene, which is present here. So this FOXG1 gene we have taken for validation of the array CGH, whether there is deletion or not. So again, we have done the same thing that I showed you before. So we took the FOXG1 gene, designed primers for one of the regions in the FOXG1 gene. After designing primers, so usually in real-time PCR, we have to use a small PCR product, so 100 or 150 base pair. We cannot use a 500 base pair or a 800 base pair product because it is useless. We just want to see presence or absence of that particular strand. Hence, we just have to design primers for very small product of 100 or 150 base pair. So you design the primers, then you take a sample DNA and you make the standard plot that I showed you earlier. Once you make the standard plot, then you take your patient DNA and again do the same thing. So you can see here in the graph. So in order to decrease the quantification errors, so we normalize it using a housekeeping gene like GAPDH. So after normalization with GAPDH, now you can see these are the two control samples who are normalized with GAPDH, and they are at one level. The father and mother both are at one level, but the patient is having 0.5 relative fold change. That means 50% of DNA is present for that particular FOXG1 in the patient, which clearly proves that this is a microdeletion. So in this way, we can use it for validation of our array CGH results. If it is duplication, we would have got it at 1.5 here. So either deletion or duplication, both can be validated using the real-time PCR by CyberGreen method. So I hope this is clear. So now we'll go on to another very important application of the CyberGreen or the dye-based method, and that is the melt curve analysis. So melt curve analysis is another application of real-time PCR, where here what we do is that at the end of the real-time PCR, when all the products are formed, after that we'll do a melting curve analysis. So in melting curve analysis, what we do is that once the DNA product is formed, we heat the DNA, and as the DNA is heated at different temperatures, we check the amount of DNA present. So if you can see here, on the y-axis is the fluorescence, which is normalized. So 100 is the maximum. So 100 is taken as the 100% is taken as the maximum fluorescence which is present in that particular PCR product, which has been done by a real-time PCR. Now you start heating this product. Now, as I told you, at 100, all the cybergreen is attached to the double stranded DNA, so you have 100% fluorescence. Now, as slowly you are so on the y-axis you have the temperature. As slowly you are heating 76, 79 degrees, 82 degrees, slowly the DNA is going to start to become single stranded. So once the DNA becomes single stranded, as I told you before, cybergreen is not going to bind and the fluorescence will start dropping. So slowly the fluorescence is going to start dropping as more and more DNA becomes single stranded, and we call when 50% of the DNA is melted or single stranded, we call this as the TM value here. And then slowly it will come down at a particular temperature. All the DNA will be single stranded and hence cybergreen cannot bind, so the fluorescence will come down to near zero. So this is the typical melt curve that we will get when we do any analysis. Now how can we use this melt curve analysis for our use? So melt curve analysis is used for detection of SNPs. So this will be a single, just like we use in RFLP or ARMS PCR. If you want to detect a single SNP, then you can use the melt curve analysis, and here the difference is going to be that depending on a particular nucleotide change at a particular position, you will get different melt curves for those particular strands. So here you can see, if it is a AA homozygous, you are going to get a melt strand of this type. If it is AC heterozygous, you will get a melt curve of this type, and if it is CC homozygous, you are going to get a melt curve of this side. So this is all the difference in these melt curves is coming just because of the presence or absence of this one nucleotide, which will change the melting curve pattern. So here we are looking at the pattern of the melting curve. Now looking at the pattern, the software can detect whether it is a CC, AC or AA. So in this way, melt curve analysis can be used for detection of SNPs at different positions by using a real-time PCR. So a typical example of this is like different kits are available for this. So this is very useful when you want to test for few SNPs in multiple patients. It will not be useful when you want to detect multiple SNPs in your in one sample or two sample, but it is very useful when you want to detect maybe one SNP in 100 samples. Then this kind of method is very useful. So we have different kits available based on this. Like this is a company called C-Gene. They have a thrombosis panel kit where this thrombosis panel checks for all these. So factor 2 mutation, factor 5, three different mutations, and MTHFR2 mutations, including an internal control. And then when you run the RT-PCR, it is going to draw these melt curves. And based on these melt curves, it is going to detect whether it is homozygous, heterozygous at that particular SNP. So in this way, real-time PCR also can be used for detection of single SNPs at different locations for our diagnostic purpose. So this is one more application of real-time PCR using the dye binding method. Now, dye binding method, what are the advantages? First of all, it is very cost effective. It is much cheaper compared to the other methods. Rapid and reliable, and melt curve analysis is possible. Whereas the disadvantages are, as I said earlier, non-specific binding. So this dye will bind to other DNA which is present also, and that may cause some problem with your data. And it has a limited sensitivity as compared to the other methods. So with these two disadvantages of specificity and the sensitivity, the next method that is used is the probe based method. So in probe based method, you have the one of the method that is called as the linear probe methods, or some commonly what we know as the Tachman probes. So here what we have is that if this is the strand that we are wanting to quantify, then we design primers here and here. So forward and reverse primers are there. In addition, we design a probe in the middle of this sequence. The probe is designed in such a way that this part is complementary to our sequence of interest. And then we have a fluorescence dye and a quencher. So normally when the dye binds, the primer bind here and here, and the probe comes and binds in the middle. And then when the PCR starts, by the 5 prime to 3 prime exonuclease activity, when the PCR, the polymerase reaches at this level, it cleaves off this fluorescence molecule from the probe, and this cues out fluorescence and the PCR is completed. So for each PCR completion, you are going to get fluorescence. So in this way, dye binding method, the probe based method is a very sensitive method. For each strand that is PCR is done, a fluorescence is released. So this is the Tachman method, which is used for many of the tests, especially in the infectious diseases. The second one is the molecular beacon method. Here the difference is that the same probe is in a different way. It is in a stem loop kind of a position, where the quencher and fluorescent dye are together here, and this is the stem, and this is our region of complementarity. Same as here, you can see this is the region of complementarity. So this region of complementarity, when the molecular beacon goes and binds to the region of complementarity, then the stem opens up, and now the quencher is not near the fluorescence molecule, and hence it gives out fluorescence. The same thing you can see here. This is the molecular beacon, but once it is added and it finds a complementary DNA, then the stem opens up and the fluorescence is released. So in this way, mostly linear probes are used, but there are kits available on the molecular beacon based method also. Both these methods detect the presence of that particular DNA or RNA in your sample. So what is the advantage of the probe based method is that similarly you are going to get the, so these are the PCR cycles on the x axis and the fluorescence on the y axis. Similarly, you are going to get the curves here, but the major advantage is because you are using the fluorescence. So in cyber green, it is just one type of fluorescence. Here you can use multiple different types of fluorescence dyes. Hence, you can do multiplexing. So multiplexing is not possible in cyber green. Here you can do multiplexing. So multiple samples can be studied at a time. So the advantages are that multiple probes for multiple templates can be done at a time, and it is very sensitive as compared to the cyber green. But the disadvantages is that the cost is quite high for the Tachman probes, and contamination is another major problem. Because of this high sensitivity, even a little contamination is there, it is going to give a positive result, and this becomes very important, especially when you are testing for viruses or something, where sample carryover from one sample to another sample, even a minute amount of contamination, it will be detected as a positive. However, another disadvantage is that you cannot use this for melt curve analysis. So you have to use different methods for this. So based on the increased specificity, sensitivity, low template requirement, and cost effectiveness, real-time PCR has a large number of applications in different types of diagnosis, microbial load testing, or SNP analysis in wide areas of medicine. So this was in brief that I thought we'll discuss about real-time PCR and its applications, how this method is applied in various different ways. Now let us come on to the SARS-CoV-2 or the causative virus for the COVID-19. So this is the depiction of the virus particle. So this virus particle consists of a membrane glycoprotein, you can see here, then a nucleocapsid protein along with the nucleic acid, that is the single stranded RNA. It has the envelope proteins and the spike proteins. So these are all the proteins that are present in the virus, and the viral nuclear material is mainly the single stranded RNA. So when the virus enters the body, then it needs the receptor on the host cell. So ACE2 is the receptor on the host cell to which the virus binds. So the spike proteins present on the virus, they go and bind to the ACE2 receptors on the host cell. And once the virus binds to the receptor, it is internalized and it will take up the host cell nuclear machinery and make multiple copies. So ultimately, it is going to lead to multiple copies within the person and lead to different symptoms in the patient. So that is about the pathophysiology of the virus that we know. So from the diagnostic option point of view, a large number of different diagnostic options are available. Most of them rely on either detection of the RNA or detection of the cDNA which is created from this RNA. So different methods are available. The most commonly used method is the real-time PCR that we discussed just now. So real-time PCR method is the one which we also use, but people are also thinking of using the next generation sequencing either through nanopore sequencing, or there are other methods like the CRISPR-Cas based method, something called as Sherlock, or the paper based biomolecular sensors where again the visualization is done based on the paper based method. So these are all different technologies which are people are trying to develop, or the antibody based immunoassay which is more for the seroprevalence studies. So these are the various ways in which diagnostic options are available for COVID-19 testing. So what is the basic path or the flow of workflow that happens in a diagnostic testing for COVID-19? So you begin with sample collection. Mostly what is collected is a nasopharyngeal swab. Oral swab is not considered that reliable, so a nasopharyngeal swab is collected. So this sample is collected using the swab, and then this swab is then dipped into a viral transport media. It's also called as a VTM. Now this tube of the viral transport media is then packed properly. They have to take precaution while packing this tube and then sent to the laboratory. So in the laboratory, we will use the viral transport medium here because the swab is dipped into this. Now we use this fluid for extraction of RNA. Once RNA is extracted from the fluid, this is converted to cDNA using the reverse transcriptase, and then the cDNA is used for doing the real-time PCR, and once we do the real-time PCR, we send the report back to the reporting agency. So this is the overall workflow that happens in the diagnostic laboratory. So this is the overall view of the diagnostic laboratory that we have set up at CDFD. So you can see here, this is the main door entry here, and then we have specific places for the data entry where all the data entry happens for the samples that are received. The main viral samples are received in a separate place here, and then they are brought, so the people put on their protective equipment, and then they go in and bring those samples into this virus sample handling lab. So this is a totally separate lab. So this virus sample handling lab, here people will enter after wearing all the PPE, which consists of the full body gown, the shoe covers, the masks, the N95 mask, goggles, head covers, and double gloves. So based on all these PPE, they will enter the laboratory here and sort out the samples, and then the samples are taken into a BSL-2 room where the tubes are opened and aliquots of the fluid are collected. So these aliquots will be used for RNA analysis. So what we do is that we have a RNA extraction room outside. So we take the lysis buffer, and the lysis buffer is given into this room. So to this lysis buffer, the people in the suits, they will add the viral transport sample. So by adding the lysis buffer to the viral sample, we expect almost 70 to 80% of the virus to be killed in this process. So that's why then this sample is brought out into the RNA isolation room. So here also, because we expect about 20 to 30% virus to be alive, here also people are going to use the same kind of personal protective equipment and do the RNA isolation. Once the RNA is isolated, now it is considered as non-infective, and it will be sent to the real-time PCR room where the real-time PCR will be done, and then the reporting is done by the data entry operators. So in this way, the whole process is standardized in a separate testing lab, and then every day we need to take care of discarding of the waste that is produced. So all that waste that is produced in this particular area, including the personal protective equipment as well as the viral transport media which is extra, or the tube swabs, everything gets autoclaved after autoclaving, it is sent for discarding by a discarding agency. So all these biosafety precautions also form part of running a diagnostic lab for infectious disease. So the same thing is just shown here in actual way. So these are the people wearing the personal protective equipment. You can see the whole body gown with the N95 mask, the goggles, double gloves, and shoe covers. And all work for with the virus is done inside a BSL-2A hood, BSL-2 level kind of facility. So here the viral aliquoting is done. The next is the RNA isolation. Here also people use the personal protective equipment, and then viral isolation is done using the RNA isolation kits. So mostly either QIAGEN or HiMedia, some of the viral isolation kits are used. Once that is isolated, then the real-time PCR is done. So you can see in the real-time PCR, we really don't have to wear that much of a personal protective equipment, because now it is considered as non-infective. So once the real-time PCR is done, we get the results. So as we have seen before, so this whole real-time PCR is based on the linear probe or the Tachman probe based method. So this is not the CyberGreen method. So in the Tachman probe based method, we just do a qualitative analysis. So we are not doing a quantitative analysis. We just need to give a positive or negative for the virus. So in real time PCR result, we can see. So here you can see on the y-axis, this is the relative fluorescence units. On the x-axis is the number of cycles. So always, as with any assay that we do, we always have an internal control to know that our assay has worked or not. So in a negative sample, you can see here for the initial cycles, there will be no fluorescence that is detected. And then here, this is the threshold line here. And you can see this is the CT value for this particular internal control. So at about 28 cycles, our internal control is detected. So we are happy that internal control has worked, but no other curve is present. So this is a negative sample. If you see here, this is a positive sample here. Again, this is the internal control, you can see. So the internal control has a similar CT value. And then we have these two viral genes, E gene and RDRP gene, for which the probes are present. So you can see here, this is a positive sample because it shows the CT value of about 24 or 25 for RDRP and about 22, 23 for the E gene. So in this way, we really don't have to do quantification, but just presence or absence of these curves tells us that this is a positive or a negative sample. Here we are comparing two positive samples. You can see here. So this green and purple is for one patient. This green and purple is for another patient. You can clearly identify that this particular patient, who has a CT value of about 31 or 32 cycles, so he is surely having less amount of virus compared to this person who is showing the curve much earlier. He is showing the curve at 23 or 22 cycles, whereas this person is showing the fluorescence at 30 plus cycles. So this patient is surely having more viral load compared to this patient. So, but we don't really do a quantitative analysis. We just have to give a positive or negative report based on this. So this is how we do the diagnostics for viral samples that we receive. So we have been doing it since mid of April, and till now about 1500 samples we have done, and of which almost about 100 or 110 are the positive samples. So every day we get about 50 to 60 samples, sometimes 100 samples for analysis. And then mostly the work till now has been done by our student volunteers, and slowly now we are getting our technicians also to get involved into this particular work, because it doesn't look like this is going to stop soon, and this work still continues. So this is the diagnostic part. Now lastly, let us come on to the whole genome sequencing for the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So what is the utility? Why do we want to sequence the virus? So the utility basically is for, one is you want to do a phylogenetic classification to see whether this virus has accumulated any more mutations as compared to the Wuhan strain or the Italy strain, or different parts of India itself? Is the virus mutating, or how it is progressing? Then to understand the spread and evolution of the pathogen. So the sequence helps us to understand how this virus is evolving through the particular geographic area, and then functional consequences of the variants can be studied. This can be useful either in checking a particular epitope for vaccine development or for drug development. You could look at the functional consequences of the variants that are present in the virus. So for all these reasons, viral sequencing has been done throughout the world, and we are part of a Department of Biotechnology consortium where they want to sequence 1,000 viruses, and of these about 150 to 200 we are planning to sequence at our institute. So, so this is a typical phylogenetic cluster development. So this I'm showing from a recent paper which came from the Indian viral genomes from CCMB and IGIB, and they have done this viral sequencing at different times. You can see this is December 19, January, February up to April, and you can see from December to April this virus has mutated so many times and then differentiated into so many different types or clades, and further as mutations accumulate, they keep on forming different kind of groups, and this whole study is called as the phylogenetic cluster analysis. So for doing viral genome sequencing, we could either use the direct RNA based method where we just take the RNA and sequence it, or we can do a selective amplification of the viral particle. Now, the direct RNA method is much easier because you just take the RNA that is extracted and sequence. But the disadvantage is that this direct RNA is going to have a lot of human RNA. And so we will have to remove all the human RNA and keep only the viral RNA. And hence a lot of extra sequencing is needed. So if you have a big machine like a NovoSeq or something where millions, like a large number of sequencing can be done, then direct RNA based analysis is easy. But since we have a smaller machine, that is a MiSeq, so we opted for the amplification based sequencing, where we are doing amplification of only the viral RNA and then using that for sequencing instead of using the direct RNA. So the steps involve sample preparation, library preparation, sequencing, and data analysis, just like our clinical exome or whole exome sequencing. So here again we begin with the sample collection, the RNA isolation, and the cDNA synthesis. So we can see here. So this is the 5 samples from which we have made the cDNA, and you can see the different bands. So this cDNA is formed of different sizes. So you will see different size bands. Now this cDNA will be used for doing the multiplex PCR. So we have a PCR set of about 200 primers, where each primers amplifies 400 base pair products. So this is a simple technique also used in many of the human testing also. The AmpliSeq panels are based on the same technique, where if this is the viral genome, you are going to have multiple primers of 400 base pair throughout the genome with overlapping primers, and this whole multiplex PCR is done to amplify about 100 PCR products at a time. And once these PCR products are amplified, they will be used for library preparation and sequencing. So since our PCR product is 400 base pair, and we are using adapters of 50 base pairs on each side, so we expect that at the end of amplicon formation and library preparation, we should have a product of 500 base pair on an average. So to check that, we do something called as a bioanalyzer analysis. So this is the bioanalyzer analysis, where you can see this is the fluorescence units, and this y-axis shows the amount of DNA. So you can see here we have almost all of our PCR product now with the average size of 515 base pairs. So now we are happy that we got what we were expecting from the whole viral, from the total RNA and the cDNA, we have amplified products which are now of average 515 base pair size, and we also get the concentration of the cDNA, which is 6000 picogram. Out of this, we need to use very few picograms for doing the sequencing. So once we have done the bioanalyzer analysis, then we go on to either sequence them on a nanopore instrument, that is a MinION or a GridION, or a MiSeq or a NextSeq, which is from Illumina. So both these can be used. We have done on the Illumina sequencer, and this is the fast QC analysis. So any DNA or RNA that is sequenced, either it is in whole genome, exome, targeted sequencing, or viral sequencing, the first step is to do the data quality analysis. So here we can see the x-axis is showing the base position. So we have a 150 base pair fragment sequencing, and on y-axis we have the quality score. So we are happy when the quality score is above 30. Okay, that is because 30 is taken as the Phred score. 10 to the, so 30 Phred score is equivalent to 1 in 1000 probability of error. Okay, so we are happy when the Phred score is above 30 for a particular read. So you can see at each individual base throughout the millions of reads, it is telling us what is the Phred score. So for the millions of reads at base pair position 1, the Phred score is 32, and the range is shown here. So everything is falling in the green zone. So we are happy that our sequencing has been good, so that we can progress with further analysis. So further analysis is same like our exome sequencing. We are going to align and map this onto the reference genome, which is from, mostly people use the Wuhan strain, or now even the Indian strains are available. So those can be used as the reference sequence, and then you map your sequences against the reference sequence. So we have all these different fragments which are then mapped onto the reference sequence. After mapping, you will get the BAM file, and that you can visualize in the IGV. So this is the coverage plot for the whole viral genome. So viral genome is about 30 kb size. So it's a very small viral genome, so 29 kb around. So this 29 kb throughout, you can see these are the different coverage. So you can see in some places there is a very high coverage, and some places there is low coverage, and then you have some places where there is no coverage at all. These are called as gaps. So these gaps usually come because maybe the out of the 100 amplicons, one amplicon did not work, and that's why this gap has come. So this is expected to come, but we have a very good coverage of the viral genome. So further bioinformatic analysis will be done for variant identification. You want to identify whether your virus is similar or having some variants compared to the reference genome. Then species diversity and phylogenetic analysis. Then comparison with the viral genome databases, and plots can be generated. So for similarities and variations, again we'll do the same thing like how we do in a exome sequencing. We try to identify what are the variants between the reference genome and our particular viral sequence. And once we have these variants, based on these variants, we can go ahead with the further analysis. This is the IGV plot of one of our samples. You can see here. So these are all the reads. So they are showing a very good coverage throughout the genome, but there are some gaps here, you can see. So 2 or 3 or 4 gaps here, but there is some sequence available here. So we are doing almost usually a overkill, because when we do this sequencing, because the viral size is so small, 29 kb, even when we do on a MiSeq, we get coverage of 2000x, 3000x, whereas in exome sequencing, we usually go for a 100x coverage. So once we have such kind of 2000, 3000x coverage, mostly we get enough coverage in every area to identify the variants. So you can see here, this is a magnified view of the same IGV, where you can see this is the sequencing gap here, and you can see the size of the gap is also similar to one amplicon size. So this is 5000 base pair, this is 5600 base pair here. So the gap is around 400 base pair, which is the size of our amplicon. So that tells us probably this amplicon did not work in the PCR. And if you can see here, these are the green lines here. This means there is a variant compared to the reference genome. So this variant is picked up here. In this way, different variants are going to be picked up into a VCF file, and then that will be used for phylogenetic analysis. So phylogenetic tree construction, just I showed earlier, by comparing with so by comparing with other so by comparing with other viral genomes, we can find what is the consensus sequence and what is the difference in our particular viral sequence, and then you can make this kind of a phylogenetic tree. You can see this is one of the earliest phylogenetic tree where they were trying to put the virus where this virus belongs. So you can see the different, this is the MERS virus here. This is the SARS-CoV-2, which is the Wuhan strain or the Korean strain here. This is the bat strains here. So this is different from the bat strain because of presence of different variants. So in this way, a similar phylogenetic tree will be built based on more and more sequences that become available. So in summary, we know that molecular diagnostics is integral part of molecular medicine. We are using it daily, but real-time PCR is very helpful in quantitative analysis of DNA as well as in SNP detection in some scenarios. And sequencing of microorganisms in epidemic outbreaks can provide insights into evolution of the virus spread as well as has implications in drug development and vaccine development. So thank you all. I thought this will be little different kind of than our routine cases that we all present. I hope it was helpful and interesting presentation.